The left's grip on culture and politics is starting to slip, and it's happening on a global scale. People are waking up to their tired playbook of virtue signaling, empty promises, and outright contradictions. For years, they've relied on emotional appeals and identity politics to keep the public distracted, but the cracks are showing. From Europe to Canada, their influence is fading as voters realize their slogans don't solve real-world problems. Leadership does. Take Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, for example. The golden boy of progressive politics is now watching his own party turn on him. Ministers are quitting, lawmakers are begging him to step aside, and the polls are abysmal. After nearly a decade of empty gestures and woke pandering, Trudeau's house of cards is finally collapsing. It's proof that you can only gaslight the public for so long before reality catches up. And right now, the left is running out of places to hide. So while we're on the topic of Trudeau, just a few days ago, he was scolding Americans.
Just a few weeks ago, the United States voted for a second time to not elect its first woman president. Everywhere, women's rights and women's progress is under attack, overtly and subtly. I want you to know that I am, and always will be, a proud feminist. You will always have an ally in me and in my government.
And there it is, folks. Another condescending lecture from Justin Trudeau, the self-appointed voice of feminism. This time, he's wagging his finger at the U.S. because we voted for a second time to not elect our first woman president. Ah, yes, because nothing says I'm a competent leader like pointing out the flaws of other countries while your own government is melting faster than a popsicle in July. Now let's break it down. The last two U.S. elections didn't reject women, they rejected two specific women. Hillary Clinton, the ultimate establishment candidate who thought she was owed the presidency just for showing up. Voters didn't say, we don't want a woman, they said, we don't want her. The woman with a track record of scandals, shady emails, and more flip-flops than a broken sandal. Then Kamala Harris, who was the Democrat Party's backup plan when they realized Joe Biden was too old and incompetent to finish a sentence, let alone a term. Kamala ran on empty promises, awkward cackles, and a charm that could be generously described as, meh. She didn't win hearts, barely got any votes in the 2020 primaries when she actually ran, and her biggest selling point was that she had a pulse and wasn't Donald Trump. So no, Americans didn't reject women. We rejected candidates who couldn't inspire butter to get on toast. Now let's talk about Trudeau's panderfest. His comments on women's rights are so insincere that even the most die-hard supporters would struggle to swallow them. He's trying to position himself as a noble ally to women, but his rhetoric completely ignores reality. Women's rights, particularly abortion rights, aren't under attack in the U.S., like he's suggesting. Sure, Roe v. Wade was overturned, but that didn't strip women of their rights. It's just handed the decision back to the states. And here's a kicker. Many states, even in traditionally conservative areas, have actually passed relatively liberal abortion laws. Utah, Wyoming, and Oklahoma, yes, those states have all passed laws ensuring broader access to abortion services on par with many liberal states. So, no. Women aren't losing their rights. They're gaining more freedom at the state level. All in all, Trudeau's lecture is lazy, hollow political posturing, and frankly, it's getting tiresome. You see, Trudeau loves to pretend he's the champion of women's rights while his own policies flop, with rising costs and struggling families. Maybe he should spend less time lecturing the U.S. and more time figuring out how to solve his own country's problems. Trudeau's brand of feminism is about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Looks nice in photos, but doesn't actually do anything. So before coming for the U.S., maybe he should just check the state of his own leadership. Spoiler alert. It's not winning any awards. And well, apparently things aren't going too well for the proud feminist Justin Trudeau, as he was recently hit with a sudden resignation of Canada's finance minister, Chrystia Freeland. Turns out the proud feminist and his top cabinet minister weren't exactly on the same page about where Canada should be heading. And by not on the same page, I mean that Trudeau was busy running the country on a steady diet of feel-good political gimmicks, while Freeland, shocker, thought it might be a good idea to actually manage the economy with some seriousness and foresight. And then he fired her. So much for standing up for women, right? This is the same Trudeau who loves to parrot feminist every chance he gets, but when it comes time to back a woman, he shrugs her off like last season's fashion. He's all about women's rights until one of the few competent women in his own government challenges him on his clueless leadership. Then it's see you later, nice to meet you. That's Swell feminist stance there, Justin. Now, the irony here is delectable, to say the least, because it's too rich to ignore, like a warm chocolate bar left in the sun. Now, Freeland, in her resignation letter, pointed out that the Canadian government faces a grave challenge with the incoming Trump administration, who's been clear about the 25% tariffs they plan to impose on Canada and Mexico. But what does Trudeau do in this situation? Offer her another cabinet position because, when things are going sideways, the best solution is obviously to shuffle the deck chairs on the Titanic. Instead of taking her concerns seriously, Trudeau tosses her aside with all the grace of a toddler throwing a tantrum. Real leadership from the proud feminist, eh? Now, Freeland's resignation letter also calls out Trudeau's costly political gimmicks and emphasizes the need for Canada to prepare for a potential tariff war, something that apparently Trudeau thought was best handled with a hearty, let's look busy and make some political statements. Meanwhile, Freeland understands the gravity of this moment very well, and she tried to communicate that to Trudeau, but he, on the other hand, has turned Canada into a parody of itself, more interested in photo ops and empty slogans than actual substantive policy. So now, after watching his finance minister bail, Trudeau has the audacity to keep running the same failed playbook, offering nothing more than hope and change, that old Obama slogan, while the country struggles to actually have any hope or change at all. And here's the cherry on top. Trudeau, the proud feminist who constantly touts his progressive values, is now losing the confidence of key women in his cabinet. Freeland, one of his former strongest allies, can no longer pretend that Trudeau's commitment to serious governance isn't just a smoke and mirrors act. The irony here is almost delicious, like that chocolate bar we were talking about earlier. Anyway, the final nail on the coffin here is the fact that Trudeau has failed to recognize what Freeland called for, a united, smart, and strong approach to the challenges ahead. Instead, Trudeau's government is built on a shaky foundation of pandering and virtue signaling, while the real work gets pushed aside. The man might be a master of selfies and woke slogans, but when it comes to running a country, well, let's just say it's a good thing that America has Canada's back, because Trudeau seems too busy trying to figure out which photo op to do next. So while Trudeau might still be prancing around in his self-imposed spotlight, acting like Canada's answer to a world leader, the cracks are becoming too big to ignore. The fact that his own cabinet is unraveling around him is a perfect metaphor for his entire administration. What was once a promising political career built on empty promises has now turned into a slow-motion train wreck. And it's only a matter of time before the rest of the world realizes that Trudeau is all talk and no substance.
Mr. Speaker, just to underline the chaos we're faced with here, the finance minister resigned the day she was to present the fall budget, which was going to contain a massive deficit overrun. The job then went automatically to the industry minister, who immediately resigned, like on the spot, which then went down the line, and the next person in order was the famous two Randys. And they're not available to do the job either. We're now less than 2 hours away from the fall economic update. Why won't the Prime Minister have the courage to come in here, present it himself, and put it for a confidence vote tonight?
The chaos unfolding in Trudeau's government is nothing short of a comedy show at this point. First, Chrystia Freeland, Canada's finance minister, resigns hours before presenting the fall economic statement. Then, the industry minister steps in to take her place, and shock, immediately resigns, as if realizing that stepping into the mess Trudeau created is like volunteering for the sinking ship. And the icing on the cake, the infamous two Randys are up next. And guess what? They're unavailable to take the job. At this point, it's like watching a bad game of musical chairs where no one wants to sit down because the seat is quite literally on fire. Now enter Pierre, I'm not even going to attempt his last name, the leader of the official opposition, calling out the utter chaos in Parliament and questioning why Trudeau won't step up, present the update himself, and put it to a vote of confidence. Now, why won't he? Because Trudeau would rather sit back, keep his hands clean, and let his government crumble around him. This is the same Trudeau who loves to parade around as a proud feminist, yet can't even stand by the women in his own cabinet when things get tough. Instead of owning this mess, he lets the whole thing devolve into a parade of resignations and finger-pointing. Classic Trudeau. Blame everyone else while pretending everything's fine. Well, Justin, it's not fine. And everyone can see your government disintegrating before our very eyes. We below your border are very concerned. Anyway, as if things couldn't get any worse for Trudeau, the man is getting run up on these streets. This is a steel worker confronting him.
Donuts over here if you want to thank you for your hard work.
I can bring some for my kids here.
Okay. The 25% tariffs we just brought in on Chinese steels can help you out.
That's going to keep my job,
That's going to be a job.
What about the $40% taxes I'm paying? And I don't have a doctor?
The $400 million that we invested in the car means you're going to have a job for
I think you're only here for another year. We won't see you around probably another year.
Well, that's what elections are for.
That's right.
And I look forward to everyone exercising the right to vote.
Yep.
And the basic choice, we're going to invest in you and your job.
I don't believe you for a second.
Dental care? Do you know anyone who got dental care?
Yeah, I pay for it myself.
Okay.
We're like 3 years behind.
You have a job and coverage?
Yeah, four people in my family.
We've got
every time we go for a dental visit, it's costing me about $50 in my pocket per person.
Okay.
Why? I have a good job. You're not really doing anything for us, Justin.
Well, actually, we just invested so 500,000 people haven't been to the dentist. Got to go to the dentist over the past few months.
Probably like my neighbor that doesn't go to work because she's lazy.
Well,
she doesn't go to work. She lives the same life I do.
Most Canadians try to stick up for each other, and that's what we're going to keep doing.
Yeah.
Good luck and take care of your family, sir.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right.
Have a nice day.
Have a good day, sir. All right, the other guys got the donuts. Excellent.
This is a perfect example of why Justin Trudeau's leadership is nothing but smoke and mirrors. You've got a steelworker who's clearly fed up with the lack of real action from Trudeau's government, trying to have an actual conversation about the issues that are affecting him and his family, but what does he get in return? A series of non-answers, talking points, and a blatant disregard for his concerns. This is a prime expose on Trudeau's failure to understand or even listen to regular Canadians he claims to represent. First, let's talk about the steelworkers' legitimate concerns, especially when it comes to healthcare. He's right to call out the shortcomings of Canada's healthcare system, specifically regarding dental care. This is a topic that Trudeau would rather sweep under the rug. That's why he's talking around it and blurting out talking points. The steelworker points out that he has to pay out of pocket for dental visits, even though he's worked hard and has a good job. This is exactly the kind of disconnect that drives Canadians and honestly even Americans mad with their politicians. Trudeau's government touts universal health care as one of their crowning achievements, yet essential services like dental care remain inaccessible to many. It's clear that Trudeau has no real solution to offer here, and his response is a laughable attempt at deflection. Trying to paint an overly rosy picture about how many people haven't been to the dentist? That's not the issue, Justin. How about those who can't afford to go, even with a job? The steelworkers' frustration is palpable, and frankly, it's entirely justified. This isn't about trivial concerns. It's about people being left behind by a government that promises the world and delivers next to nothing. But instead of taking a moment to empathize, Trudeau just pushes his talking points like a robot stuck on repeat. We've invested in you, he says. But when pressed, he's completely incapable of addressing the real concerns the steelworker is raising. The steelworker calls out the 40% taxes he's paying on the lack of real support, and Trudeau, instead of addressing these serious issues, launches into a vague, canned response about voting and elections, as if that somehow solves the problem. This isn't a conversation, it's a performance. Trudeau is more interested in ticking boxes and moving on than actually engaging with the steelworkers' genuine concerns. It's as if they're having separate conversations in the same room. Trudeau doesn't even try to connect with the worker on a personal level or acknowledge the serious issues raised. The steelworker's frustration isn't just about his situation. He's speaking for the countless Canadians who feel left behind by Trudeau's empty promises and inability to enact meaningful change. And let's talk about the grand irony here. Trudeau, the supposed champion of the working class, could care less when confronted with the reality of the working class life. He's more concerned with offering up platitudes and avoiding difficult questions than addressing the real needs of Canadians. His investments are just buzzwords to distract from the fact that millions of people are struggling. Meanwhile, he continues to parrot his progressive rhetoric, all while failing to deliver on the promises that would actually make a tangible difference in people's lives. This is Trudeau's leadership in a nutshell. Lots of show, no substance. All in all, this video should serve as a wake-up call for every American entertaining the idea that universal health care, as promised by people like AOC and other leftists, is really not the utopia that people have tried to spin it as. The reality is far from the sunshine and rainbows painted by political idealists. What you see in this clip is exactly what could happen. Lack of accessibility, exorbitant taxes, and rationing of care. Just look at the steelworkers' frustration with the Canadian healthcare system that isn't truly universal for many. The high taxes he faces, the lack of tangible support for the working class are all issues that could very well be replicated in the U.S. under similar policies. Universal health care might sound great in theory, but when it fails to meet the needs of people it's supposed to serve, it quickly becomes a hollow promise, and that's the reality Trudeau's government is facing. And speaking of healthcare, we're going to shift on to The View because they've got a lot of really weird opinions about RFK.
Do you want RFK Jr. to revoke any vaccines?
No, I want him to come back with a report as to what he thinks. We're going to find out a lot. I think you're going to find that Bobby is a very rational guy. I found him to be very rational. No, nothing, you're not going to lose the polio vaccine. That's not going to happen.
So, RFK Jr. also said yesterday that he, too, is all for the polio vaccine as he tries to sell his MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again. And it's been gaining ground with folks. But let me remind everyone that long before him, MAHA was already Michelle Makes America Healthy. Okay? That's what she was doing when she was first lady. So it's not an unknown concept.
Yeah,
right.
That's true.
So
now he's out there saying this. But do you actually believe anything he says? Tell the truth. I mean, they overturned Roe v. Wade. He said he wasn't going to put anybody in who back to Project 2025. A lot of people that he's put into this new administration believe that stuff. He said that grocery prices would magically come down. He already admitted that they can't very easily come down. Yeah. Remember when during COVID, he said, no masks, you don't need masks. That was also BS.
All right, let's break this down because there's a lot here. First, let's address Whoopi's attempt to undermine RFK's Make America Healthy Again movement. Her comment, Michelle makes America healthier, is not just the cheap shot, it's an outright fallacy designed to deflect from the real issue. She's trying to discredit RFK Jr. by associating his message with something that's already been done, because apparently in Whoopi's world, if Michelle Obama did it first, it must be irrelevant now. The issue isn't whether someone else has called for a healthier America before, it's about what RFK Jr. is actually advocating for now, in the present moment. His concerns are grounded in addressing the real systemic issues of food quality and health, which, as much as Whoopi may want to mock, are valid topics of concern. But instead of engaging with the content of RFK's message, Whoopi tries to dismiss it by making it seem like this is a ripoff of something Michelle Obama has done in the past. It's the type of classic misdirection people do when they can't argue with substance. Now let's move on to Joy Behar because, quite frankly, everything she says is just a dumpster fire of logical fallacies. Let's tackle them one by one. Joy starts off by asking, do you actually believe anything he says, which is an incredibly disingenuous question because it implies Trump is someone whose words should be immediately dismissed. But why should we disregard him just because you, Joy, don't agree with his positions? That's a straw man argument, attacking the person instead of addressing the argument itself, all while concocting a speculative narrative that isn't grounded in reality. But their positions on other issues aren't the black and white caricatures that Behar tries to paint. Then Joy pivots to an attack on Trump's stance on COVID. She brings up his no masks position as though it discredits everything he says. First off, it's important to remember that at the time of those comments, there was a great deal of uncertainty about the virus, and public health guidance shifted dramatically as new information came in. To say he was wrong about masks doesn't negate everything else he has said or stood for, especially when other voices, including Dr. Fauci, also shifted their stance as more data became available. Joy conveniently ignores this context, opting instead for a gotcha moment based on hindsight. It's a cheap shot and a clear sign that rather than addressing the actual complexities of the debate, she's happy to throw out one-liners that sound good without engaging with the deeper issues. Now, on the topic of grocery prices, Joy argues that Trump magically promised they would come down, only for him to admit that they can't easily be fixed. Well, let's take a moment to actually look at the situation. Grocery prices are skyrocketing, and anyone who's paying attention knows that inflation is a huge issue right now. Trump didn't say prices would magically come down. He was likely pointing to potential policy changes or reforms that could lead to price stabilization, though the economy is complicated and such promises require more than just simple solutions. To twist this into a critique of Trump's credibility is not only unfair but dishonest, honest. Joy conveniently ignores the broader context of economic hardship and how Democrat and Biden's policy failures have exacerbated our current economic situation in America, instead choosing to attack Trump's rhetoric without offering any real solutions herself. Finally, Behar brings up the overturning of Roe v. Wade and claims Trump put people into his administration who believe the stuff from the Project 2025. This is an accusation with zero substance. Trump has made it clear that his stance on abortion rights is nuanced, and unlike Behar's oversimplified portrayal, he doesn't treat the issue as black and white. In fact, his position of leaving it up to the states is mirrored by the great former, very liberal Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But instead of engaging with his actual stance, Behar throws out an accusation meant to paint him as a radical right-wing figure. This is a clear smear tactic 101. It is designed to make Trump seem extreme without engaging with the specific details of his policies or positions.
I think in terms of medical school, I think we want our doctors to understand the systems of our bodies, and I think we want our doctors to understand the history of medicine and a lot more. And what's really interesting is that, RFK Jr. doesn't have a medical degree. He knows not much about medicine. And what scares me, to your point, Joy, when people tell me what they're saying the first time, I believe them, like Dr. Maya Angelou told me to. And this guy, RFK Jr., has made it very clear that he is a vaccine skeptic. And what we have to remember is it's not going to be a narrow position. If you are the head of the Department of Health and Human Services, that's a very big, broad position, not a narrow position. They're not going to just put him in charge of food. They're going to put him in charge of everything. And what he just refused to answer in terms of some questions for CNN is he refused to answer about whether he stands by his previous comments tying vaccines to autism. That's all you need to know about him. He refused to answer the questions. And the other thing he said was he plans to question the entire science of vaccines. We know that vaccines work. We know that vaccines save lives. We know that our children need them. Let me just jump in on one thing,
Sunny. Sunny Hostin, yet another shining example of someone trying to sound authoritative when completely misrepresenting complex issues. Let's break this down because the statements here are riddled with logical fallacies, oversimplifications, and a healthy dose of misinformation, which she calls out RFK and Trump for that, but there may be an argument that she's more proficient in misinformation than both of them combined. First, let's address Sunny's assertion that RFK Jr. doesn't have a medical degree, implying that this somehow disqualifies him from discussing vaccine safety. This is a classic appeal to authority fallacy. Just because someone doesn't have a specific credential doesn't mean their concerns are automatically invalid. The truth is, science thrives on questioning the status quo, and skepticism is an essential part of the scientific method. RFK Jr. isn't claiming to be the end-all expert on medicine. He's raising important questions that many in the public are concerned about. Dismissing someone as not having the right paper only weakens the conversation and ignores the broader point that medicine is about questioning, testing, and reevaluating based on evidence. In fact, without skepticism, we wouldn't have medical advancements or improvements. So claiming that RFK Jr. is unqualified just because of his credentials is not only misleading, it completely disregards the fundamental nature of scientific inquiry. Now let's tackle the idea that being head of the Department of Health and Human Services means you're in charge of everything. Sunny seems to have forgotten how checks and balances work in our republic. The head of the HHS is not a monarch with absolute power. This is a massive bureaucracy that requires input from experts, legislators, and various stakeholders. The notion that RFK Jr. would have sole control over everything, including vaccines, is absurd. He'd be part of a system where decisions are made through committees, peer reviews, and democratic processes. But instead of acknowledging that, Sunny tries to paint a picture of unchecked power, which is simply not how government, especially in America, works. The HHS head is a bureaucrat, not a dictator. And let's not gloss over the repeated claim that RFK Jr. refused to answer questions regarding his past comments about vaccines and autism. Let's be clear, just because RFK Jr. has questioned vaccine safety doesn't mean he's advocating for the disbandment of the entire vaccine program. His stance has always been about transparency and making sure that safety protocols are followed. Sunny wants to simplify this into a villainous narrative of he's anti-vaccine, and that's a straw man argument. RFK Jr. is concerned with vaccine policy and its influence, and questioning the status quo is not the same as dismissing the entire concept of vaccines. Sunny's dismissal of RFK Jr. is also highly hypocritical. She's quick to dismiss his concerns, yet we all know that public health policy isn't flawless. Vaccines save lives. Yes, that's true, but so does having an open, honest conversation about their safety. The fact that Sunny is more interested in dismissing anyone who dares to question the medical establishment rather than addressing the issues raised is a failure of intellectual honesty. It's one thing to believe in the efficiency of vaccines. It's another to act as if all debate should be shut down because you think it's settled. The truth is, medical policy is complex and nuanced, and dismissing legitimate concerns only ensures that we stop evolving. So let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Why is it that when someone challenges the status quo, especially in the realm of healthcare and public health, they're instantly labeled as the enemy? Whether it's RFK Jr.'s questioning vaccine safety or a steelworker calling out Trudeau's failures, the common thread is the collapse of the left's control of the narrative. Trudeau's government, built on empty promises and a false sense of progress, is unraveling before our eyes, and yet the left doubles down on its tired talking points rather than confronting reality. Just look at the way Sunny Hostin dismisses any skepticism. When leftism can't even tolerate healthy debate, it's clear it's losing its grip. From Canada's failing healthcare system to the U.S. grappling with unchecked bureaucracy, the left's stranglehold on these issues is slipping, and it's time to face the fact. The collapse is coming, and it's all on them. Anyway, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.